Hey W Crew, John here with another video. This time we're jumping back into D&D commentary, everything about the OGL 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1. Never happening, all the way into Creative Commons licensing. Not directly on the OGL today, as that's kind of settled news at this point. It's more about living in the afterscape of this, let's say. Living with the fallout and addressing some more of the comments that we've received. Some of these are older comments. Alan, it's about your comments here today if you're watching, so that's great. I'm going to start tackling some of the very verbose comments that you've left. And I don't say that insultingly, quite the opposite. I think it's a very useful perspective to pull into. For those that are new to these videos, what I'm doing in this series is kind of going into the business of gaming. And what I would mean by that is not just the economics of gaming within the game itself, but how that can apply to the rest of your life and how someone like me, a mildly autistic data analyst, would be looking at this information and hopefully giving some insight to people about how businesses look at that information too. In my experience in working with businesses, sometimes us as the players or the creators or the DMs in the case of Dungeons and Dragons or the GMs in the case of whatever other game and whatever other leaders within the community we can talk about within the game of your choice. Sometimes we have our perspective, but it's interesting how different that can be from the perspective for the company that makes the game. And since companies of a certain size have to make the games that we're playing once they've reached that certain level of size, why do they sometimes make the decisions that are against the players, even if they clearly want the players to win enough to continue buying the product? Why would they have that disparity? Sometimes it's idiocy, sometimes it's pure greed, sometimes it's a calculation mistake, and sometimes it isn't a mistake, but it looks like one to the inexperienced eye, and it's that world that I'd like to tackle most. So, jumping in for the topic today, I'd like to talk about the influencer effect, or how advertising would work, and the value of that towards Wizards of the Coast specifically. In brief, for anyone who hasn't seen the videos before, Wizards of the Coast has been dealing with fallout from attempting to change the OGL 1.0 and then getting cold feet, mainly because, as near as we can tell, the community pushed back. And like a David and Goliath story, the David, in this case, the community fighting against Wizards of the Coast, appears to have won. And we don't know what the fallout will be to Wizards of the Coast yet. It does seem like many people are upset over the victory because Wizards of the Coast has still hurt their feelings. And I don't say that dismissively. I say it in a, your feelings are important enough as a community, and if you put that community power together collectively in some way, you can hurt Wizards of the Coast financially, which is the only thing the company would care about. And that's interesting because typically a community can't hurt a financial company that much, or the financial standing of a company that much, I should say. So what does that mean in this case, and is that what's happening? We're kind of playing that out together as my own little community as we build this together. So keep those comments coming, and if you're new to the videos, please throw me a subscribe, throw me a like. Let me know what you like or dislike in the videos and what you'd like to see me explore next. The more comments that you leave, the more likes you have on the video, and the more information that you give me to be able to work with, the more that I can take that information, grow the community, and I promise to grow the community to a place where I get paid for it, because that's what I care, like a company. That's what I care about. So I promise to do that for you. I promise nothing more. So, back to the topic at hand. Our friend Alan, through a lengthy comment that I'll put up here on screen, I know this is just part of the comment, Alan, but this is the piece that I wanted to talk about today, was about trying to measure the value of the community to Wizards of the Coast, because what seems to be clear is Wizards of the Coast has undervalued the community, and that's why it looks like they're stuck backpedaling now to say, actually what the community's building and doing in free advertising and free labor for us is not free if they decide to take that away. It's really the entire business that we have here through Dungeons and Dragons. And that was part of the question that I had posed several videos ago, which is, how would we measure what that impact is? It's one thing to say the impact's big. It's one thing to say it's expensive. It's one thing to say Wizards of the Coast regrets it. I think all of that's true, but how big? Is it big enough to impact Wizards of the Coast long term? We don't know until we can figure out what the scope is that we're talking of. So it's my attempt to get to the bottom of that. How valuable is the community? And does Wizards of the Coast agree with that valuation? And how would we measure that difference? Because like any situation where there's a, let's call it a trade negotiation, the two sides will disagree. How do you meet in the middle? And where's the middle? Is it closer to Wizards of the Coast's view, which is you guys as a community are mostly value-less? That's why they would try to do the change that they did. Or is it closer to the community's view, which is you guys are the whole value of Dungeons and Dragons, and Wizards of the Coast is just the company that is lucky enough to profit with the work that you guys put in? Both are possible. How do we determine what the truth is? What I would look at as a data analyst is, how could you make someone else pay for your work? And that's why I asked the question the way that I did. What do you guys think your advertising is worth? And Alan's given us the first attempt here at the question, so I will give away the ending a little bit here. I very much disagree with your math, Alan, but I first of all respect that you're the first one to put forth numbers, and starting with a starting point is far more valuable than starting with no starting point. Having numbers on paper can sometimes give us to a situation where we can say, well, these numbers are wrong, but it did make me think about this, and maybe that's closer to the value, or maybe as this spirals off somewhere, we can land to a certain value that we can say, that's believable, or that's something we could test. And if we know our value as a community, it lets us negotiate for a better value. But you can't negotiate for a better value if you don't know where you stand today. And I don't want to give away this years-long plan that I'm hoping to be able to turn some of this into, but if I can help you guys come up with a value for the community, you can see if you can market that value. You can't market it if you don't know what it is. So let's dive into these numbers. And we've put them up on the screen at this point here. In short, what we're looking at for the values today would be mostly influencers. I'm going to stick with just YouTube's numbers. For now, for most of the numbers that we're seeing, except for the total dollar value, we're going to assume all that math is correct. So YouTube typically measures its advertising revenue in a number of different ways, but assuming you're part of the YouTube Partner Program or the YouTube Share Partner Program, whatever they call their payout program, I'm not part of it yet. Help subscribe to the channel so I can get there and I can find out how it works better, and then I'll be happy to tell you. Essentially, they pay for ads in a cost per meal, which is basically cost per 1,000 views. Meal, the French for 1,000. And that cost varies depending on the type of content you're producing, which advertisers want to be associated with which type of business. It varies a lot, but let's say that the value in terms of advertising on your average Dungeons and Dragons channel is set at $50. So if you want your ad to show up for a period of time on this channel, that would cost you $50 as the advertiser to put that out there. And then the revenue that's generated from that is based on the number of views through the channel. Let's say all of those numbers are static for sake of argument, that all of the YouTube channels that are producing content, that there are thousands of them, that they're producing hundreds of thousands of hours of content, and that that's all monetized at an equivalent rate. We know that's not true, but to give us a number to argue with, let's say that's true. The number that Alan came up with conservatively, which is based on thousands of content creators making an average of 2 videos per week that have an average of 20 minutes, and you can do the math towards what's in the comment there. Essentially, it leads to hundreds of thousands of hours of view time and revenue that's generated. So what he's saying is not that this is Wizards of the Coast's bottom line that's coming from this, because we know that's not true, but the value to the market at large would be something like $500 million. I think the figure, if I remember correctly, Alan, that you landed at was about $430 million of value. Let's say, sake of argument, that if Wizards of the Coast wanted to replace their bottom line, so the money that would come to their products that are selling, which is what I'm trying to get to the bottom at, let's say that that was more like $250 million. Let's take half of that figure just to give us a nice, even, round figure to work with, which we're saying is conservative. And I think based on the number of hours viewed of content, those numbers are conservative. I actually agree with those numbers. Here's how I, as a financial analyst, as I was one in the past, I'm just a data analyst now, but often the data I analyze is finance, so what's the difference? It's the same thing. What would I try to use as a comparison for the market here? And here's how I would look at it. Let's say all of those content creators who are making all of this content that is worth $250 million, let's say they all unionized. And the reason I'm saying that is not so much because they should or that would even work. It's not really that kind of setup. But say they could all agree collectively as a group that to teach Wizards of the Coast a lesson, or to crash them as a company, whatever the case is, you're all going to withhold your content from Wizards of the Coast. You're not going to talk about that anymore. You're going to talk about Paizo. You're going to talk about Pathfinder instead. It doesn't have to be Paizo if you don't like Paizo. It's just an example. Let's pretend the entire tabletop community all agreed together, instead of making Dungeons and Dragons content and then a smattering of other content, but we all agree Dungeons and Dragons is the biggest player by a wide margin. Instead of doing that content, we're all going to come together and just make Pathfinder content. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to do our channels exactly the same, except it's all Pathfinder now. We're going to push everyone to buy Pathfinder figures, everything that benefits Pathfinder, and nothing that benefits Dungeons and Dragons. What would that do? Well, presumably, that would mean that if Wizards of the Coast was the beneficiary of $250 million of goodwill advertising, then instead of that money going towards them, it would be going towards Pathfinder, because they'd now be the only beneficiary of that by and large. So far, that all checks out, and I'm sure you guys all agree as well that if the money isn't going towards Wizards of the Coast, and all the creators are on purpose only talking about Pathfinder, then it's all going towards Pathfinder and Paizo. That would mean Paizo's revenue would be, 20 times bigger than it is today? So, like some astronomically large figure for a company that size. So I think it'd be safe to say if you guys all talked to Paizo about that, they would be on board, right? They'd be foolish not to be on board. If you went to Paizo as a group and Paizo had a reason to believe, yeah, this is all the content creators, this is everyone that matters, you guys all agree, you'll sign a contract with us even that says you'll only talk about Paizo, so we can rely on that. Would Paizo be happy with that decision? I'm sure they would. Would they be on board with your decision? I'm sure they would. So let's imagine this scenario for a second. You guys as content creators, all of us together, assure Paizo that we will only talk to Paizo, and we sign a contract that says we will only do that. They're not paying us or anything like that. We're just guaranteeing that we're giving them the goodwill and not Wizards of the Coast the goodwill. So Paizo has this to rely on. Paizo can't sell 20 times of the product that they're selling today. They're already running into trouble with the much smaller than that amount that they're growing. I believe they're waiting until April, or not waiting, but having work done until April to be able to replenish some of their stock, because in a matter of a couple of weeks, they sold out a year's supply or 8 months supply or some astronomically large number. They're going to have an amazing year for them, but they can't absorb even more flow than that. They're obviously already overtaxed. So in order to benefit from this, they would have to take out loans to be able to say, go to a bank and say, we need more factories, we need more developers, we need more content creators, we need to hire double our staff, triple our staff, quadruple our staff. We need to hire a huge amount of people. And the content creators could say, listen, we'll work with Paizo entirely to say, we're going to push users there slowly. We're going to let them finish up the campaigns they're already running. We're going to encourage everyone to do this at a method that works best for Paizo, because screw Wizards of the Coast. We want to help Paizo at this point. We want to make sure that they feel this and that they never have the opportunity to do something like this again, because they'll be driven out of business. Here's the impetus of this argument. Could you guys collectively go to a bank and get a loan for that? Could you borrow the amount of money needed to be able to set that up in place? Meaning, would a bank look at your business case and say, so what you're telling us is all of these influencers are worth this amount of money, and Paizo, you'd like to borrow enough money to get your revenue to this place. So you'd like to borrow $200 million so that your revenue can go up by $250 million a year. And you're saying your revenue will go up by that amount because all the influencers will be talking about you. Do you think a bank would say, yeah, good enough for us, sign you up, we'll give you a good interest rate, 5%, that's pretty good today, that's maybe below prime. Would a bank sign up for that? No? I agree. I'm letting you know now, the second you sat down to talk with a bank, even if you could have every content creator agree to only make content for Paizo, So we're taking 100% of D&D content today, and we're only going to talk about Paizo from now on, only about Pathfinder. Everything else is the same. The audience will stay the same size. Let's imagine that. The creators stay at the same number they were at. Their viewership is the same amount it's already at. Paizo will need loans, but their plan is to grow into the same size as Wizards of the Coast so that their revenue is matching and they can take advantage of all of that. How much would a bank loan them? How close could they get to that? Could they take half of that amount? No. Could they take 10% of that amount? Could Paizo go in and borrow $25 million today on the hope that influencers will generate that much revenue for them? No. I think without going into it too deeply, you guys already know the answer. And here's the sad truth. That means it's not worth that amount. Here's another way to look at this, and this is a good rule of thumb for just about everything in your life. Money is just energy. So all I'm asking in that question is, you guys as a community are willing to give away your energy for free to talk about your hobby. Whether that's a good trade for you or not is your own personal question. I'm assuming because you do it, it's a good trade for you. I'm doing it. I didn't even think a month ago that I would be a D&D player by any stretch, but I am now. I am talking about it now. It's a fascinating thing, and the game has a lot more to it than I thought that it would, as do the competitors. I'm agnostic towards the competitors at this point here. I don't have a preferred tabletop RPG, but the community's extremely invested. The game is extremely good. The way the game is played hits all of my math ticks that I would want it to. It's excellent. But is it worth money? Am I worth money to D&D right now? Under this argument, I would be a little bit, but I'm not. Because I wouldn't be able to go to a bank and say, hey guys, I've got this number of viewers, they watch this number of channel hours, and I know my channel's too small, but say that I continue this trend and a year from now I have more than 1,000 and I'm part of that advertising revenue as well. Could I go to a bank and say, here's my share of this number of people watch my ads, would you give me a loan for 50 grand so that I will talk about this company exclusively, and then you'll see that you'll get money from that type of revenue? No bank would do that. How much could Paizo capitalize on that? That's what you guys are worth. If somehow you could all unionize together and decide to have one impetus that you pull towards, since that's also impossible, you're worth significantly less than whatever Paizo could borrow against that promise. Try it out at some point. Talk to someone who has business experience, or if you know someone who works in a bank, who works especially in a business division or something, present it like a business case. What's the influencer worth? What's the advertisement worth? I think, unfortunately, you'll be surprised that it's far less than you thought it was. And that's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. Not to make everyone depressed or to feel as though you don't have an impact on the community. You have a huge impact on the community. But does Wizards of the Coast feel the pain of you guys talking angrily about them? They don't feel nothing, but they certainly don't feel $250 million either. It's much closer to nothing than it is to $250 million. And as we explore this topic further, I think we'll be able to uncover more of a proper price for what the community's worth. And we might not be happy about the answers that we come to, but if we can start with that answer, then we can start exploring how would you become worth more as a community? Because being worth more financially doesn't have to express itself in dollars. It could express itself in better negotiating for better games. Wizards of the Coast will listen to you more if you're worth more to them to listen to. Right now, your biggest weakness as a community is you don't know what you're worth. If you don't know what you're worth, you can't increase your worth. How would you know you went in the right direction? So that's where we're going to leave it for today. I'm going to spend the next couple of days as well exploring this from an advertising model a little bit more, because there's a lot more to unpack there. And I think it'll help poke us in the right direction towards trying to determine what are we worth as a community, and how do we then grow that worth into something that gets respected by the big companies that at the moment could just decide to turn around and put their boot on our neck again. Let's hope to find that answer together. Until then, we'll talk to you soon.